My jaw dropped when I checked the security cam and saw Karen, the HOA president, lounging half-naked in my private sauna like she'd just booked a 5-star spa day. She wasn't even trying to be sneaky about it. Wrapped in a towel, sipping rose straight from the bottle, cucumber slices on her eyes, she had the nerve to hum along to the spa music I installed for my post-therapy relaxation. And just when I thought it couldn't get more absurd, she leaned into her phone and whispered, "He'll never know. His place is basically community property anyway." That was the exact moment I decided she needed to learn what private really meant, preferably in a cloud of skunk gas. 3 weeks earlier, I'd been enjoying a quiet evening on my back deck, the kind I built this place for. I'm not your average homeowner. I'm a war vet who bought land on the edge of the HOA's jurisdiction specifically to avoid the nonsense most of my neighbors put up with. My property is legally excluded from the HOA's authority, a fact I had notarized, certified, laminated, and even had tattooed as a joke on my calf one drunken night. But jokes aside, I had every right to install a personal sauna tucked behind a row of cedar trees, 10 yards from the fence line. I built it with my own 2 hands. That place was my peace. After years of managing PTSD, anxiety, and the everyday noise of civilian life, I finally had a haven. So when I saw Karen, once again, walking the perimeter of my property with a clipboard and binoculars, I knew something idiotic was brewing. Karen had a long and colorful history of overstepping. The first time we tangled, it was over my porch lights. She claimed they were disrupting the aesthetic harmony of the block. They were solar-powered LEDs with a soft amber hue. When I politely explained that she had no jurisdiction over my home, she smirked and dropped a violation notice in my mailbox. When that didn't work, she tried a public smear campaign at the next HOA meeting, suggesting I was a hostile recluse with antisocial tendencies. My crime? Not attending the block barbecue where she served tofu sliders and lectured children about lawn maintenance. The second time she crossed the line, literally, was when she hired a landscaping crew to trim a tree on my side of the fence because it violated the community's silhouette standards. Not only was it my tree, it was a heritage oak older than the HOA itself. I had to threaten legal action just to get her to back off. So when I installed the sauna, I went overboard on the permit. I had zoning board letters, fire safety inspections, property line surveys, all notarized. I even left a small but clear private property, a no entry sign on the sauna door. That didn't stop her. Nothing ever did. I first noticed something odd when my motion-triggered security camera sent me a notification while I was out grocery shopping. At first, I thought it was a deer or a stray cat. But then I opened the feed and froze. There she was, towel, wine, bare feet, just making herself at home. She glanced around like she was checking for snipers, then tiptoed up to the sauna door, turned the knob, and walked in. I switched to the inside cam and nearly choked on my coffee. She pulled out a Bluetooth speaker from her tote bag and connected it to the sauna's internal system, replacing my carefully curated meditation playlist with some sort of new age elevator music. Then came the wine. She reclined on the bench like Cleopatra on vacation and tossed her phone on the cedar shelf. I couldn't stop watching. Not out of fascination, but because I was genuinely baffled. Who does that? Who trespasses onto a neighbor's private property, strips down, and treats it like a personal spa? Karen. That's who. She looked completely relaxed, like this was something she did regularly. And the part that really got me? She said out loud, "He'll never know." Which means this wasn't her first offense. That sauna had probably seen more Karen than I ever cared to imagine. I waited until she left. She was in there a full 40 minutes. I watched as she exited, towel still mostly wrapped, wine bottle mostly empty. She strolled off my property like nothing had happened. And that's when the anger kicked in. Not just because she violated my space, but because she acted like it was her right. I spent years in high-alert zones overseas, dodging landmines and bullet And now, back home, I'm supposed to accept that my biggest threat is a woman with a clipboard who thinks a neighborhood charter gives her divine authority? That night, I couldn't sleep. I replayed the footage over and over. Her smug little grin. Her tone. Her complete disregard for boundaries. It wasn't about the sauna anymore. It was about control. About sending a message. She had humiliated me in my own home, disrespected my healing space, and assumed I'd do nothing about it. That's when the idea started forming. Something petty, something poetic, something unforgettable. The next morning, I called an old buddy of mine, Darren, who runs a wildlife control business. A few years ago, he helped me humanely remove a family of skunks from under my deck. We got to talking, and I asked if he still had those scent generators they use to ward off coyotes and raccoons. They're non-toxic, harmless, and absolutely revolting. Darren laughed so hard when I told him why I wanted one, I thought he might pass out. "You're gonna skunk trap her?" he wheezed. "No, man. I'm gonna teach her what private property really smells like." By the end of the week, I had the equipment. I tested it once in the garage, instantly regretted it, and had to evacuate for an hour. But it worked. The smell was indistinguishable from an actual skunk attack. Perfect. I spent an evening wiring the diffuser discreetly under the sauna's cedar bench and synced it to a remote trigger on my phone. The cameras were re-angled, and the motion detector fine-tuned to detect only human movement. Everything was ready. All I had to do now was wait for Karen to return for another, unauthorized spa session. And judging by her complete lack of shame, I figured it wouldn't take long. I wasn't just hoping for justice. I was counting on it. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of something being taped to my front door. I didn't even need to look. I already knew it was Karen. Sure enough, when I opened it, a fresh violation notice fluttered to the ground like a passive-aggressive snowflake. This time, the alleged offense was unauthorized signage impacting community harmony. Apparently, the small plaque on my sauna door that said "private property" was now considered a visual disturbance. She even included a photo with a red circle around the sign, like she was conducting a criminal investigation. I stood there barefoot, coffee in hand, just staring at it. It was laughable, but also infuriating. Not only had she invaded my sanctuary, she had the audacity to cite me for trying to prevent it. I crumpled the paper and tossed it straight into the trash. It was time to hit back, but with precision. I didn't want a petty shouting match on the sidewalk or a rage-fueled rant at the next HOA meeting. No, Karen needed something unforgettable. Something theatrical. Something poetic. And best of all, something she'd bring on herself. That's the beauty of a trap. You don't force it. You just build it, bait it, and wait. That evening, I attended the monthly HOA meeting, not out of interest, but because I wanted witnesses. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a beige box of a building that always smelled faintly of wet carpet and desperation. Karen sat at the front with her usual smugness, flanked by her loyal cronies. I waited until new business was called for, then stood up and calmly said I had a matter of personal concern. When Karen tried to wave me off, I held up my tablet and said I had something everyone should see. I played the footage. There was Karen, clear as day, walking onto my property, unlocking my sauna, and helping herself to my private retreat. There were gasps. Someone even choked on their sparkling water. She tried to speak, but I raised a hand. The clip continued, her lounging, sipping, humming, all while blabbering to someone on speakerphone that my property was, basically, community. I stopped the video before it got awkward, turned off the screen, and looked her straight in the eye. "Any thoughts on that?" I asked. Karen blinked like she'd just swallowed a wasp. "That footage is taken out of context," she sputtered. "I thought it was a shared amenity." "Amenity?" I repeated. "You mean my legally excluded, registered, and locked sauna behind a privacy fence?" She stammered something about lack of signage and unclear property lines, but the board wasn't buying it. A few members looked horrified. One man, Harold, usually asleep by this point, was wide awake and glaring. "This is trespassing," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Karen turned red, but her pride wouldn't let her back down. She doubled down, said I should have made it clearer the sauna was private, that she only entered because it looked inviting. At that point, someone snorted from the back. The board agreed to look into it, but the damage was done. Karen's credibility was now wobbling like her favorite flamingo lawn ornaments in a windstorm. The next day, I fine-tuned the trap. I made sure the skunk-scent diffuser was working perfectly. I mounted a small internal camera in the sauna, cleverly hidden near the vent, angled to catch the moment of truth. I reinforced the outside lock so she wouldn't break in through the front, and added an auto-close mechanism on the door that would gently shut behind her. Everything was tested and ready. All I needed now was a return visit. And sure enough, 2 days later, she came slinking around again. I was in my kitchen making eggs when the alert pinged. I opened the camera feed and there she was. Karen in a fluffy white towel, green face mask already applied, slippers flapping as she crept along the side path. She scanned the yard like a raccoon in pearls, then tiptoed to the sauna, glanced around once, and opened the door. The camera inside caught her slipping in, shutting the door behind her, and sighing like she'd just entered paradise. I watched her settle in, set down her wine, and start fanning herself with a laminated HOA rulebook. She leaned back against the wood, pulled out her Bluetooth speaker again, and blasted a playlist labeled Zen Vibes _Karen Mix. The audacity was almost beautiful in its absurdity. She had no clue she was seconds away from smelling like she'd been in a landfill brawl with a family of skunks. I waited a beat, picked up my phone, and pressed the remote trigger. The diffuser kicked in silently, releasing a potent burst of synthetic skunk gas. Odor only, no danger. Within 5 seconds, the camera caught her wrinkle her nose. She looked confused. At 10 seconds, she was sniffing the air and frowning. At 15 seconds, her face morphed from curiosity to horror. She bolted upright, gagged, and started frantically waving at the door. But the sauna was designed to keep heat in. The foggy glass was sealed with condensation, and the door, gently shut by the autoclose, was sticking slightly from the inside humidity. She started yelling, pounding on the glass, slipping on her own towel as she scrambled. I was half laughing, half cringing as she fought with the latch. It took her another 10 seconds to wrestle it open. She exploded out of the sauna like she'd been launched from a cannon, screaming at the top of her lungs, cucumber mask dripping down her face, arms flailing. She tore across the yard like a lunatic, shrieking about gas attacks, barefoot and covered in steam and shame. She didn't even grab her wine. The whole thing was recorded. My camera got it from 3 angles, and my neighbor across the street, who was watering his roses at the time, caught the final sprint on his phone. He called me 30 minutes later and just said, "Bro, you owe me a drink." That was better than cable. Karen called the police, of course. I heard the sirens from my living room. I stepped outside and greeted the 2 officers politely. Karen was gesturing wildly in my yard, still half-toweled and skunk-scented, ranting about illegal chemicals and personal injury. The officers asked me if I had footage. I said I did and offered to show it. They watched the video. They saw her sneak in, sit down, and trigger the gas herself. One officer actually bit his lip to stop from laughing. The other cleared his throat and said, "Ma'am, this is private property. You entered it without permission. Honestly, you're lucky you didn't get sprayed by an actual skunk." Karen looked like she wanted to melt into the grass. They gave her a warning for trespassing and told her to take it up with the HOA if she had further complaints. She stormed off with a towel over her head like a disgraced reality TV star. I turned to the officers and offered them coffee. One declined. The other said, "Man, I wish more people handled things like this." That night, I re-watched the footage twice. Not because I wanted revenge again, but because I hadn't laughed that hard in years. It was more than just justice. It was cathartic. I had turned a symbol of her arrogance into a monument of her humiliation. And the best part? She did it to herself. The morning after the skunk gas incident, the neighborhood was buzzing, both figuratively and literally. Karen had made such a scene that people a block over had heard her screeching like a banshee. By noon, the video my neighbor had taken had already made it into the local Facebook group. He didn't even add a caption, just posted the footage of her darting across my yard, face mask melting, towel barely hanging on, and tagged it with a simple, "Neighborhood drama or Olympic tryouts?" It exploded. Comments poured in, memes were created, and someone even auto-tuned her scream and posted it on TikTok. Within hours, she had become Steamroom Karen, a character that, unfortunately for her, would now live forever on the internet. I should have felt a twinge of guilt, but honestly, I didn't. Karen had crossed a line that most people would never even toe. I gave her more than enough chances to back off. She chose war, and I just happened to have a more creative arsenal. Still, I figured she might simmer down after public humiliation, maybe lay low and let the incident die out quietly. I underestimated her ego. Around 4 p.m., a knock came at my door. I opened it to find a man in an ill-fitting suit holding a manila envelope and adjusting his tie like he'd just learned how to wear one. He handed it to me without a word and walked off before I could ask anything. Inside the envelope was a cease and desist letter, allegedly from Karen's brother-in-law, an attorney whose credentials seemed about as legitimate as a cereal box coupon. The letter accused me of chemical assault, intentional emotional distress, and public defamation. The kicker? It demanded a formal apology, a signed agreement to remove the sauna, and a public retraction of all digital evidence. I burst out laughing right there in the doorway. Not only was the letter riddled with grammatical errors, but it was clear Karen had dictated it herself, probably while still reeking of faux skunk musk. I called my own attorney, a college friend who actually passed the bar and now specialized in property and nuisance law. He took one look at the letter and said, if this was any more amateur, it'd come with crayons. We decided not to respond formally just yet. Instead, I compiled every piece of footage, date-stamped records, previous HOA violations, and even pulled copies of Karen's past complaints that targeted multiple neighbors over the years. It was time to go from defense to offense. I started building a case, not for court, but for the board. I had a feeling I wasn't the only one with a Karen horror story. Sure enough, once word spread about her latest stunt, people started coming forward. Harold from down the street revealed that Karen had once fined him for having a non-compliant holiday wreath, which turned out to be a memorial for his late wife. Susan, 2 houses down, shared that Karen demanded she remove her porch swing because it created unregulated noise when the wind blew. Another family had been cited for allowing their kids' birthday balloons to remain tied to their mailbox for more than 24 hours. The deeper I dug, the uglier it got. With all the stories in hand, I requested a special HOA board meeting. The bylaws allowed it with enough resident support, which I easily secured with the help of Susan's banana bread and Harold's legendary pot roast. People were eager, no, desperate, for change. And this wasn't just about personal vendettas anymore. It was about neighborhood sanity. The emergency meeting was scheduled for a Thursday evening. Karen showed up in full control freak uniform, blazer too tight, clipboard in hand, and a smug expression as if she was about to quash a rebellion with sheer willpower. She opened the meeting herself, rambling about misinformation campaigns and baseless internet slander, clearly trying to preempt whatever was coming. But no one interrupted her. We let her dig her own hole. When it was my turn to speak, I walked up with a folder full of organized documents and a thumb drive containing all the video evidence. I kept it simple. I presented the facts: trespassing, harassment, public embarrassment, frivolous citations, and the clear abuse of HOA authority. I showed the board the cease and desist letter, and they actually laughed. I played the Sauna video, not the skunk part, just the portion where she entered, set up her little wine station, and monologued about how I'd never know. Then, I let the other residents speak. One by one, they stood up and shared their stories. The birthday balloon family showed pictures of the violation notice taped to their kid's gift box. Harold, visibly shaking, read aloud the wording of his holiday citation. Susan had actual audio recordings of Karen banging on her door during a Zoom work meeting, shouting about overgrown ivy. It was a flood of frustration, years of minor humiliations suddenly bubbling to the surface. By the end, the board looked overwhelmed. Even Karen's closest ally, a sour-faced woman named Lorraine, seemed shaken. There was a vote. It wasn't even close. Karen was removed from her position as HOA president effective immediately. Her replacement was Ray, a retired firefighter and local legend for rescuing a raccoon trapped in a gutter using only a rake and a box of Pop-Tarts. Everyone cheered. Some even clapped. Karen, on the other hand, stood frozen, red-faced, mouth agape, like a villain who just realized the hero had recorded everything from the start. As she stormed out of the clubhouse, she hurled her clipboard to the floor with a dramatic thud and hissed something about lawyers and defamation. No one followed her. No one cared. The dictatorship had finally fallen. Later that night, I stood in my backyard, the cool air brushing against my skin, listening to the peaceful quiet that had returned to the neighborhood. The sauna sat there glowing gently, restored to its rightful place as a haven, not a battleground. I leaned against the deck railing, sipped some tea, and for the first time in weeks, truly relaxed. Karen's reign was over. But I had a feeling this wouldn't be her last tantrum. People like her don't go quietly. They fester, regroup, and wait for another chance to impose themselves. But I was ready. I wasn't just some loner with a sauna anymore. I was the guy who skunked a tyrant and started a neighborhood revolution. And if she ever came back, I had a fresh diffuser canister and a new scent on standby, this one labeled Extra Strength. The day after Karen's downfall felt like a national holiday. Neighbors were outside smiling again, people waved instead of scowling, and someone even put up cheerful paper lanterns without fearing a citation for unauthorized decor. For the first time since moving in, I felt like this place might actually be a community instead of a low-budget dystopia run by a towel-wrapped tyrant. But as satisfying as it was to watch Karen's iron grip snap like an overcooked breadstick, I wasn't naive enough to think it was over. Her silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. She hadn't moved out, and I hadn't seen her car leave the driveway in over 24 hours. She was either reeling or reloading. By the second day, the viral video of her sauna sprint had crossed platforms. The TikTok version had over 2 million views, and someone added a laugh track to it that somehow made it even funnier. A remix surfaced with the words, "Private property means private," Karen flashing in neon over her face. I hadn't posted any of the videos myself, but once they got out, the internet did what it does best. Turned a moment of madness into a meme. Her screech became a ringtone. A group of local high schoolers even showed up to the clubhouse dressed in towels and face masks, reenacting the whole scene like a Shakespearean tragedy gone wrong. To her credit, or maybe just pure ego, Karen tried to mount a comeback. On the third day, flyers appeared in mailboxes titled, "The Truth About the Skunk Incident." They were printed in Comic Sans, and the narrative was breathtaking. According to Karen, she had been lured into the sauna under false pretenses, then subjected to a targeted chemical attack involving illegal toxins. She claimed she had fainted, woken up with memory loss, and had to be rushed to a detox center for neurological cleansing. It read less like a formal defense and more like the plot of a low-budget sci-fi movie involving alien mind control and scented vengeance. Nobody believed it. Not even her remaining allies. Lorraine, the one board member who had voted to keep her, quietly resigned 2 days later, citing emotional burnout and an allergic reaction to cedarwood. That left the new HOA President Ray with a full team of rational people. Ray, a man who once pulled a teenager out of a frozen pond with nothing but a garden hose and a sense of purpose, called me up personally to thank me. He even offered to come inspect the sauna, just to confirm that it wasn't booby-trapped with radioactive fog, as Karen had implied. We shared a good laugh, and I let him know I had deactivated the diffuser. The trap had served its purpose, and justice didn't need to stink forever. By the end of the week, HOA business had returned to normal. Violations were now handed out only when absolutely necessary, and instead of paranoia, the neighborhood seemed to relax. Families started organizing a spring block party, complete with a bouncy house and live music. There was even talk of converting one of the unused HOA lots into a community garden. It was like someone had lifted a heavy, invisible lid off the neighborhood, letting air and light pour back in. But while most people were celebrating, Karen remained holed up inside her house like a deposed dictator under self-imposed house arrest. Occasionally, I saw her peek through her blinds. Once, she came outside in a hoodie and sunglasses to bring in her mail, and it looked like she was being hunted by paparazzi. Every time a car passed, she flinched. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. What finally broke the silence wasn't another stunt from Karen, but a letter, one that arrived in my mailbox marked confidential. It was from the County Code Enforcement Office. Karen had apparently filed a formal complaint accusing me of running an unlicensed chemical hazard zone in a residential area. She claimed the sauna was now an environmental risk and should be investigated. I couldn't help but laugh. After losing her position, her power, and her credibility, she was trying one last Hail Mary through the county. It was sad. But it was also annoying. Thankfully, I had prepared for this. I already had safety documentation from when I first installed the sauna, as well as signed statements from the wildlife specialist confirming the diffuser was non-toxic and legal. I scanned everything, attached it to an email, and sent it off with a brief summary of the entire incident, including the video footage. I also CC'd my lawyer, who responded 5 minutes later with, "Nice. Slam dunk." The county inspector scheduled a visit just to tick the box, and when he arrived, he stayed for less than 10 minutes, mostly to shake my hand and chuckle at the situation. He called it the most bizarre complaint he'd received all year. I asked what came second. He said, someone reported their neighbor's wind chimes for being hypnotic. Just when I thought the saga was winding down, Karen made her most desperate move yet. She tried to file for a restraining order, against me. Her claim was that I had weaponized environmental stimuli to induce fear and humiliation. The court clerk who handled the paperwork apparently had to step outside to laugh. Her request was denied before it even reached a hearing, and she was warned that filing baseless restraining orders could be considered harassment in itself. She never showed her face in court. Probably because she knew the moment any of it became public record, more people would come forward with their own stories. And they did. An anonymous Reddit post popped up titled, "My HOA Karen got skunked, and now she's trying to sue a sauna." It included screenshots of the cease and desist letter and snippets of the Comic Sans flyer. It blew up fast. Suddenly, people from all over the country were sharing their own HOA horror stories. The comments section became a support group for victims of entitled neighborhood powerholders. One user wrote, "This man didn't just trap a Karen, he inspired a revolution." Another one called me the Skunk Avenger. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or hide. By the time the block party rolled around, Karen was nowhere to be seen. Her house remained dark, blinds shut tight, with a growing pile of unread mail collecting near her door. Meanwhile, I walked through the celebration like a war hero returning home. Neighbors handed me beers, thanked me for liberating the block, and one older couple even made me a handmade sauna-scented candle labeled Victory Mist. I didn't expect any of it. I just wanted peace. But I had to admit, it felt good to see the neighborhood smiling again. Near the end of the night, someone lit a bonfire in a small fire pit, and we all sat around it swapping stories. Ray raised a toast, to sanity, to community, and, with a smirk, to skunks everywhere. We all laughed. I caught a glimpse of my sauna in the distance, glowing quietly in the dark. Untouched. Undisturbed. Mine again. The way it was always meant to be. The block party had felt like a proper turning point, a final breath of fresh air after months of clenching teeth through HOA tyranny. Kids ran around with glow sticks, dogs were off-leash without fear of phantom fines, and the music didn't stop at exactly 9 p.m. It went until someone accidentally knocked the speaker into the punch bowl. Nobody called the cop. Nobody lectured anyone about quiet hours. The absence of Karen's presence was felt in the same way one feels relief when a migraine lifts. Not spoken out loud, but collectively shared. Still, even with her dethroned, the echo of her chaos lingered like smoke after a wildfire. I knew better than to think she was done. People like her don't retire. They wait. They plot. And unfortunately for her, so do I. The morning after the party, I sat on my porch with a fresh cup of coffee and a sense of cautious calm. The sauna sat in its usual spot, its cedar panels catching the soft morning light, looking serene and completely innocent. No skunk scent, no trespassers, just peace. That alone felt like a personal victory. I had started this whole saga simply wanting to be left alone. I never intended to be some symbol of anti-Karen resistance, but the neighborhood saw it differently. I was now the guy who stood up, not with shouting, but with tactics. Quiet, clever, calculated justice. And maybe that's why what happened next hit me like a sucker punch. Around noon, a black SUV rolled down the street. It wasn't marked, but it had that distinct blend of tinted windows and seriousness that made you sit up a little straighter. It pulled into Karen's driveway. Two people stepped out, one in slacks with a tablet, the other in a dark windbreaker with county code enforcement stitched on the back. My stomach turned. It couldn't be. She hadn't. But as I watched them walk toward her house, I realized the petty war wasn't over. It was just escalating to the bureaucratic front lines. The inspectors didn't stay long, but when they came back out, they weren't alone. Karen followed, red-faced, agitated, trying to hand them a folder that looked suspiciously thick for a complaint. One of the inspectors waved her off and walked toward my side of the street. I stood to meet him, trying not to let irritation rise. He was polite, said they had received several contradictory filings, related to an environmental nuisance and trespassing case involving my property. When I asked who filed them, he just glanced toward Karen's house and raised an eyebrow. I invited them to walk the property, and I laid it all out: documentation, footage, witness reports, letters from my lawyer, and even the diffuser itself, safely stored and clean. The inspector chuckled when he saw it. "This," he asked, holding the small, nondescript canister. "This is what she called biohazard warfare?" I nodded. "It's coyote repellent. Used legally across farms and camping grounds." He shook his head, muttered something about needing a vacation, and told me not to worry. They had what they needed. As they walked away, I caught a glimpse of Karen watching from her window, expression blank but twitching slightly, like someone who had tried everything and still lost. I thought that might finally be the end. I was wrong. That weekend, someone tried to vandalize my sauna. It was subtle at first, just a smear of something on the window, possibly food or some kind of oil. Then a few days later, the lock was damaged. Not enough to break it, just enough to show someone had tried. I fixed it, installed a new hidden cam, and kept quiet. The next night, someone threw a rotten tomato at the sauna wall. The smell hit the cedar, mixed into something revolting. I checked the footage. The figure was hooded, quick, and disappeared down the alley. I didn't see a face, but I didn't need to. No one else had a motive. But I still didn't retaliate. Not yet. Instead, I doubled down on security. I added motion-activated spotlights, a second layer of fencing, and an automated system that played a loud recording of barking dogs whenever the sensors detected movement past midnight. The lights alone were enough to send whoever it was scrambling. But the barking? That was just for my own amusement. It didn't take long before the petty attempts stopped. Karen, it seemed, had run out of energy or resources, or both. By the end of the month, her house went up for sale. The sign appeared early one morning with no warning. No open house. No staging. Just a plain for sale sign hammered into her precious manicured lawn. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The very woman who fined a neighbor for having a single solar-powered gnome was now packing up in silence, defeated not by a lawsuit or police report, but by skunk gas, shame, and the collective will of people who just wanted their homes to feel like home again. A few days later, I saw the moving truck. Karen didn't make eye contact as the crew loaded boxes. She wore a wide-brimmed hat and large sunglasses, but there was no mistaking her posture, rigid, bitter, defeated. She glanced once toward my house, not in anger, but with the hollow look of someone who realized the world had moved on without her. I gave a small wave. She didn't return it. Then she got in her car, drove away, and didn't look back. Just like that, she was gone. That night, I walked out to the sauna with a cold drink and sat inside, the heat washing over me like a well-earned reward. I closed my eyes and breathed deep. It didn't smell like skunk. It smelled like cedar, sweat, and victory. I stayed in there longer than usual, letting every moment soak in. When I finally stepped out, the stars were out, the street was quiet, and the air felt new. The next morning, I replaced the old wooden sign on the sauna door. The previous one had said, "Private Property." The new one, carved by hand and painted in bold red letters, said, "Trespassers will be skunked." It wasn't just a warning, it was a story, a memory, a monument to the time I took back my peace without raising my voice. Neighbors came by later that week, admiring the sign, laughing, still trading Karen's stories like folklore. As the weeks passed, the neighborhood settled into something better. The HOA began focusing on real issues: drainage problems, sidewalk repairs, setting up a community garden. The ridiculous violation slips stopped entirely. Kids played louder. Dogs barked longer. People lived freer. And as for me, I finally found what I had been missing all along. Not just silence or space, but the feeling that home meant something again. Not because it was protected by laws or locks or even skunk gas, but because it was respected. And that, more than anything, was the sweetest part of the victory.